So I'm excited to unpack this discussion you had with Jeff Salzman.
Oh, yeah, me too. I'm getting more and more impatient with like every interview. Like I just did another one this morning and I'm
Yeah.
like, I just need to talk about it with Nate immediately. Like I'm just so the Jeff Salzman one, since the moment I stopped recording it, I was like, when are we going to do the debrief? Like, I'm so
Yeah.
excited. Yeah.
Yeah. And what are some of your lingering feelings? I know it's been a while since you had the conversation itself, but like in the wake of that, or as the smoke clears, as they say, what were you left with? I'm curious.
So right now at this moment, because I've been thinking about it I haven't stopped thinking about it, but maybe not what we talked about, just kind of the implications. I'm a little bit bummed that he's stopping the podcast
Okay.
and that his vision for the future is arguing with people on Twitter, which is
Yeah.
not to criticize that. I'm like
No.
he's doing what he wants to do, but I think the podcast is so helpful,
Sure.
and I'm like
Well,
thinking
maybe.
about opinions I have about things and seeing current events, be like, God, if there's a Jeff Salzman podcast about this today, it would really help me. I have that thought a lot.
Are you the next Jeff Salzman?
Well, it was something I wanted to ask him, and maybe I will before this airs, and maybe I will after this airs. But if there's some way we can collaborate and kind of bring his wisdom, like include his wisdom into what we're doing, I would really love that.
Well, you guys stumbled upon that line, and I'll just remind you of it. But this was something that both of you thought was sort of critical to the spirit or the idea of evolution and discovering who the next you is,
Mm-hmm.
or being mindful of that, or preparing the ground. And I don't want to criticize his departure into the Twitterverse, as he calls it. But what do you think about that? Just candidly, just between you, me, and our 10 million fans.
Yeah, no, I mean, I really believe, like in
Yeah.
everything we're doing, like I really believe that where people find their joy and their calling is their greatest service. And if I mean, basically, for me, it means he has got thick enough skin or detached enough from his own perspective to go into that. I don't know much about Twitter, but everything I hear about it, it's like it can be kind of
A
rough.
fight club. I've heard
Yeah,
it referred to recently as a fight club.
yeah, this kind of like rough environment. And he's not only is he like can tolerate that, but he really sees that as being his most efficacious way forward because he doesn't want to just talk to people like you and me who are looking to him for wisdom and in general agree with him, but he really wants to get into it. He wants to do the work of dialectical synthesis, and to do that you got to talk to the two sides that are in conflict and kind of get beat up a little bit by both of them, and then trying to find the synthesis or trying to present the synthesis to each side. So I think it's obviously, maybe it's not obvious, but I think it's incredibly valuable.
I mean, in a sense, it seems to me that that's sort of the paradox, or maybe even the dirge of the integral movement, is how do you escape sort of the bubble that
Mm-hmm.
it creates around itself?
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny. I'm listening to the conversation. Every so often, you have someone that I would say this is an integral guest. We talked about this with Stephanie Lepp. It's gotten to the point now where I think we can like call this an integral podcast. It's been such a central theme in so many of your conversations, and maybe it's good we just linger for a moment on this as a movement. And even Jeff talks about like it kind of having a moment of death in one of its manifestations. But it's interesting, right? Like he wants the integral ideology or worldview, I guess would be a better characterization of it, to be mainstream. But Ken Wilber decidedly operated outside of academia, right? Like it wasn't he wasn't part of the academy. He didn't go that route, right? It was almost like something was like necessarily needed to be nurtured outside of that framework of the mainstream for it to take root. And yet it does live in its own kind of world. And even now, like Jeff, after having such a long life in that work and doing such incredible work, still has this urge or this hunger now to move outside of that bubble. And I wonder, other than just escaping the kind of the mire of the conflict and the argument, how it's optimized to sort of amplify these arguments on that platform. What are some of the challenges you think are just there structurally for an integral worldview to take root or to do this, what you said, dialectical synthesis, which I could take to mean putting two opposing sides together and ushering them, or almost like mediating that dialogue to some type of integration or synthesis? What do you think is like most immediately standing in the way of that? Be it mainstream or in any of these channels, what stands in its way?
I think that the short answer might be the fear of not being heard. Like if I get into an argument with you, let's say we're married, and it's like some kind of domestic dispute or a political or a philosophical dispute. The key thing that's going to keep me in opposition and antagonism to you is the feeling that like, you don't get me. You're not valuing or listening what I have to say. And so of course I'm not going to be receptive to your point of view. And this is just so basic, but yet everywhere around us, it's like totally unfollowed or unacknowledged, even in my own life. And I know this, but like every argument I'm a part of is because I'm not actually listening to the other person, or the other person does not feel like I'm listening to them. Like we're not creating the actual conditions for dialogue. And that's where you get into this reactive. Twitter, I think, is probably a good example of just like this really reactive, like, this is what I believe, or this is my criticism of you, or this is what's bad about what you're saying. I think that's just the challenge in dialogue. And to have like a successful, functional dialogue, you have to confront that challenge of just hurling insults at the other person because you don't feel heard, you don't feel listened to. So this is kind of mutually self-reinforcing death spiral of respect, right? So, but that's where the whole integral movement, or like Jeff or Stephanie, or this incredible, I was so moved by the position paper on abortion that Institute for Cultural Evolution, which Stephanie is now the director of. Since we had her on the podcast, she got offered that position. And Jeff is on the board of that organization, apparently. And I didn't know that they were connected, but they are. So that's kind of cool. But, I remember reading that position paper on abortion and being like, wow, I would think, and, who knows if this is true, but that anyone from any side of the debate on abortion could read that and feel like their voice was heard and their position was understood. Even if that position does not really agree with any of the mainstream thoughts on abortion, it really includes every perspective, every of the three kind of modern mainstream perspectives, and acknowledges and integrates it into its solution. And if Jeff is kind of like an avatar, or like kind of a walking personification of that approach, I feel like that's his role on Twitter, is to like go to the different sides and be like, yeah, that is fucked up. I do see the point of that. And to build a relationship that way, because it's not duplicitous. Like he actually does. At his best, at this kind of mythical Jeff I'm imagining him to be, he actually does see the point of all the different points of view, can acknowledge it, and then see its limitations. And I was actually trying to communicate this to some kids yesterday. I was visiting my friends, Max and Eva in Oregon. And their, their daughter or my daughter, some kid was trying to ask for something. And I was like, if you can ask for what you want using the values and interests of your discussant, of the person of which you're asking the thing, it's just going to be way more, if you can just show them how what you want is in their interest, it's way more effective. And I feel like that's what I would want to do in this kind of dialogue. But you can only do that after you've established this, like, hey, I hear what you're saying. I respect it. I value it. And it's like, and I get it. I have the same pain. Like I was listening to a Sam Harris interview yesterday, which is not something I do very often. And I was listening to it and I was like, God, fucking Sam Harris. And I was like, if I were going to talk to Sam Harris, I wouldn't start with being like, man, why are you just so anti? And that wouldn't get me anywhere. I would have to like acknowledge and feel his pain of like, God, sucks to be attacked the way you've been attacked.
Hmm.
And I've been criticized and I've been attacked. My words have been taken out of context, and even in
Hmm.
something as personal as my marriage, not to mention other things. So like we all know what that feels like, and
Hmm.
it's like it's just good to honestly like connect with that feeling of, all right, yeah, you're gonna be a bit bitchy and a bit anti after people have attacked you for a while, and to really like feel that before trying to get into it with someone about why they're behaving a certain way.
So in a sense, this has really become a continuation of our conversation about Stephanie Lepp and her work.
Yeah, I
And
mean they're in the same vein, right?
well, it's, yeah, I mean, and I would say, I mean, arguably throughout the whole couple seasons now that we've been doing this, there is this through line that's emerging. And, what I understood from our conversation last time, what I walked away from that with is that this technology exists and
For
it,
deep fakes, you mean? What
no,
technology?
oh, sorry. Yeah, let me clarify this technology of nonviolent communication.
Oh, right. Yeah. Very different technology.
And this integral technology.
Yeah.
So if we take it as that, it's a technology and it's in the hands of whoever finds it and stumbles upon a book or someone or personality or a podcast, that they're able to see it, recognize it, and then try it. And if it's expedient for their ends, they're going to keep using it. And that's almost like a free market solution to this,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? Like if it works, if it's good, if it does what it says it does, genuinely, people will use it because it's in their best interest. And then it leaves me wondering, what's the term? Was it domestic frau? What
Oh,
was the
Hausfrau.
house house frau? I'm seeing I'm seeing Jeff kind of show up the first day of Twitter camp as a housefrau, ready to mix it up. And in a sense, what I heard from Jeff is just that he's ready for a new chapter.
Mm-hmm. Oh
He's
yeah.
ready, in the sense, it also mirrors some of the things that we discussed with Rick Jarrow. This kind of home, this return to the hearth, to the home, to the kitchen, to the garden, growing your own vegetables, cooking food. It's a chapter, and you honored it really beautifully by speaking about these four stages of life.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't familiar with those, except I would draw those parallels to Siddhartha, the book,
Mm-hmm.
and that's, I guess, possibly now where that came from.
Yeah.
But that you just said that this is actually, and he received that so beautifully. Like that was such a kindness. You could see that it really touched him
Mm.
to say, "Oh yeah, this is part of the path, and this is a noble part of it. That I've done the thing, and it's there for people to take." So, I'm also wondering that then, how much do we really need to push it? Because there's something in there too, in your conversation that speaks to a faith in the impulse for evolution.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And that's a bit of a paradox on its own, isn't it? That if we're in here mixing it up, trying to do something, bring society to this teal level of consciousness, to
Mm-hmm.
this new world view, and yet there's something kind of in the mechanics already that it's happening. It's doing itself in a sense
Yeah. Well, through us
through us, yeah.
and
Well,
everybody else.
and and through our urge to do the work. Then,
Yeah. Yeah. I
yeah.
mean, this is where that Rabbi Rachel.
I was just going to,
Right. I
yeah.
mean, just and the whole nap ministry thing that she brought
Yeah,
to our attention.
I was just going to go there, of
Yes.
course. And
Yeah.
just to remind the folks that the quote from the Talmud is that it's not your work to finish, neither is it yours to abandon.
Yeah.
But there is
And
an
as Madonna
yeah,
says,
yeah.
I hear you call my name, and it feels like home.
And it feels like home.
Right. I mean, that's like Jeff is like he heard the call, he did the thing,
Yeah.
and then he's like hearing this other call
Yeah.
to be in this other stage, and knows he has like the confidence, something more than that. Yeah, the kind of the almost like the inner peace to be like, oh yeah, this is good. People are going to take this forward.
So confidence and peace. Would you call that faith?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a good word for it too, for sure. Because like obviously we have no idea about what's going to happen. Let's just acknowledge that. So there's always faith because it's like who the hell knows.
And I want to acknowledge kind of a central part of your conversation and your respective journeys too, was this wrestling with spirituality, with the divine, which, to me is something that's missing from the dialectic altogether, or at least if you're looking at the left and the right, or sort of the proto-Marxist and then maybe the capitalist or whatever. But there's really, both are really grounded in a materialism.
Oh yeah.
Or if you talk about Sam Harris, who's, a professed liberal, but in a very staunch, not budging atheist, right? And I'm sure a lot of your friends who come from math and computation and science and rigor, you'd say some things that refer to the divine, or I think maybe Jeff said like spirit guides or something like that. There's so many people I know that would just immediately kind of discount that.
It's really tricky.
Yeah.
So I recorded an interview this morning with Dr. Amy Robbins, who's a psychologist by training, just a lot of work around death, like what confronting death really could mean for us. And she got into this stuff about the afterlife and past lives in our podcast. And I was that guy. I was like, whoa. You're getting into this woo-woo stuff that I'm totally not comfortable with. It's just like, I don't think it's bullshit or whatever it is. And I've been on the other side of that conversation a lot of times, these are some experiences I had with psychedelics, and tell you about it, and friends being like, that's totally impossible. But what I find like a way to navigate, like kind of the needle there, threading the needle, is without getting into belief systems. Like if we're just talking about our own experiences and what effects those experiences have on how we live our lives, it becomes much less arguable, and it attracts the attention of the kind of the rational serpent a little bit less. So she's telling me this story in the interview this morning, and I'm noticing my skepticism. And then I'm also noticing my total lack of desire to argue with her, because she's not putting out like a metaphysics thing of like, this means there's 7 planes of existence and this and that, and the soul weighs 6 grams. She's just like, these are these trippy experiences I had, and this is what I decided to do to integrate them and improve my life and the lives of other people based on these. And for me, that to me is how I would love to integrate spirituality and like non-material experiences into our lives, because it's just unarguably good to like draw lessons that are going to improve people's lives.
Well, can I just point out for the listener also the way you express that fits into the template of nonviolent communication again. As an expedient way to communicate something, which is to say, this is what I experienced, this is what I felt, and this is what I experienced. And there's less room for your opponent to find ground to argue.
Yeah. There. And it makes me like wince a little bit, or what's that word? Twinge?
Cringe? That's what the kids say.
Cringe. It makes me cringe to I have all these memories of myself in college and afterwards being like super like left-wing activist style and telling people how to like live their lives. And I think all of that was just like me trying to say, whoa, I discovered a new way of looking at the world, and I'm going to live my life differently. And I've done some experiments, and it's provided me with a lot of joy. I'm excited about it. But at the time I was phrasing it in this very normative, like, everyone who shops at the Gap is an asshole kind of scene. And it's just not.
I think Kanye just said that on Twitter, actually.
Oh, because of the whole like chopping down the redwoods thing?
No, different.
Different. Okay. Yeah. But it really, it's just not effective. It's not effective at building a relationship. And once you understand that like any kind of consciousness change or idea change is based on a relationship, usually with humans, there's just like small percentage of the time where you could be convinced just by logic, which is what mathematicians do in like their journals. It's just like proofs. Like, you didn't think this could happen? I can prove it. But most of the time, unfortunately, we just don't have our antenna up for pure logic. And it's really like, you got to have a relationship. You got to have a reason to care and listen to the words somebody's saying. And I just did that like so poorly.
Well, you just said you have to have the reason to care.
Yeah.
That's interesting to me, which you have a lot less when you're young, because you have a little less skin in the game, right? I mean, here's at least my experience of that.
Yeah.
When I was young, all I had was my ideology,
Mm.
and I felt like I owed it everything. And as you grow, you develop these relationships, this interdependence with communities, with
Mm.
partners. All of a sudden, you have a lot to lose in every communication and a lot to gain. And so maybe that's it. Maybe that's the missing ingredient in youth, is actually being really invested in these relationships enough to, what did you say, have a reason to
To
listen, a
listen.
reason to care. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have another question for you. I wonder then, what is the evolution then? What's the evolutionary step, or what is it that the integral philosophy offers that's not magical thinking? So by its own sort of letter, it talks about sort of this magical worldview as being one of the early forms of human evolution. And yet there is some, call it mythic poetic or mystical or something that isn't totally producible by logic in the integral theory. What's that step? What separates that from someone practicing a shamanic existence hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not like into the. This is an interesting thing. That's like, I feel like I'm inspired and you're inspired by
Yeah,
kind of some of the journey that Ken
right.
Wilber has like held our hand on. And there's all these people that are kind of into
Yeah.
this movement, and I'm really into the rough outlines of it. Like I
Uh,
really I could feel it. I like the way the tide is going,
yeah.
but I don't want to speak to any of, I don't want to get into like kind of
The
doc,
dogma.
doctrinary debates about this because I don't know shit about it, and I actually don't think
The
it's that important. You
the
know,
hermeneutics of
yeah,
Ken Wilber.
the
Okay.
the details, but I think the key
Yeah.
that they're offering us, they're like, hey, you're just looking at the dessert part of the menu. They're like, take a step back, look at the whole menu. You can include all of these different perspectives, all of these different dishes. They're like, dude, it's tapas. You can pick all these different things and have them enrich your life and enrich your interactions with others. So like, thank God for modern mathematics. Thank God for understanding of physics. Thank God of how we can we're like people are building spaceships. Like randomly, they're
Yeah.
just they're like planning to go to other planets, the moon, all this. I mean, they've done that for 50 years, but it's still just totally amazing, right? So that's awesome. And you can still like open your heart to the mystery,
Yeah.
what like Uncle Jamal is talking about. And there's this space of infinite compassion available to you to heal you in this moment from the mystery. And we could try and explain what that mystery is and give it a name, or machine elves or Allah or whatever, or you could not, but it's there and you can experience it, just like you said at the beginning with NBC. You can experience it through meditation, you can experience it through psychedelics, you could experience it through vision quests and silence and pilgrimage. There's all these things that every culture across the world has developed like weird shit to give you a little glimpse of the mystery, and you could take advantage of that and enrich your life, just in the way that like you could get a washing machine and enrich your life, and it's going to be like good. You can spend more time painting because you're spending less time like hand wringing the clothes. That's kind of how I see it.
Yeah. Great. Then I dub you the next Jeff Salzman. I think
If
I
I could
think
only
there's
be so
something
lucky.
beautiful and poetic though, sort of in maybe the doctrine doesn't make it. And maybe that's sad or poignant, but maybe that's not the point that Ken Wilber's taught in universities 50, 100 years from now. Maybe more the point is that this worldview, this sensibility, this, as I'm calling it, a technology of sorts, makes its way into the hands of the people, and that they actually practice it in a way that serves them and then somehow serves the greater good at the same time. Thanks for chatting, Ankur. You're a fun guy. And
Did you
thank
just
you all.
you just called me a
Yeah.
mushroom?
No, wait, no, did I? We'll go back and listen to the recording. We'll see. Thank you all so much for listening, and tune in next time where Ankur and I will continue the same conversation again and again until we get it right. We really appreciate your attention.
I wanted to say aho, and then I was like, cultural appropriation police.
Yeah, we'll get it. Find us on Twitter where we're trollable at
But we're gonna get destroyed by everybody.
10kh.show.